Welcome into another video. This time we're doing Thursday Night Football for week 4 as the Lions take on the Packers. This should be a really good game. I can't wait to dive in. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at the fantasy players to watch in this game. First, on the Lions side, the top fantasy players in my opinion are Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Sam Laporta. Now, for starters, let's talk about Jared Goff. Goff is going against a defense giving up the 10th fewest passing yards and ranked 12th for fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Goff is playing very well, and as of late, I can only assume it will even get better once Jameson Williams comes back. Even though the Packers have a very good pass defense, they should be without star cornerback Jair Alexander due to a back injury, which should make it a bit easier for Goff. Look for Goff to give you another consistent outing this week against the Packers. Now let's move on to Jahmyr Gibbs. Now Gibbs is going up against a defense giving up the 6th most yards and ranked 22nd for passing points allowed to opposing running backs. This could be a true breakout game for Gibbs. Now that he's getting the bulk of the workload out of the backfield with 17 carries last week, he's starting to show his true colors. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry last week and is improving every day. Gibbs should be able to gash this Packers defense. Now, as a side note, Montgomery says that if it were up to him, he would play this week, but I just find it hard to see the Lions letting Montgomery play with a risk to further the injury with an extended break before their next game. I see the entire workload just going on for Gibbs this week, just going his way. Next is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, St. Brown going up against a defense ranked 7th for fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. As I mentioned before, the main guy who would be covering St. Brown looks to be sitting again this week in Jair Alexander. St. Brown should be able to find the open space and produce a solid fantasy outing without much trouble. Lastly, let's talk about Sam Laporta. Now, Sam Laporta is going up against a defense ranked 16th for fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. Laporta is not the number 2 tight end on the season, and it just happened what it is. It's largely due to his performance, or his really big performance last week. Now, while I don't see him, having a week like he did last week, I still think that he's a consistent target guy for this offense. Jared Goff seems to be in the building and just building a lot of trust with the rookie tight end, and should definitely be in your lineup if you have him. Now let's go ahead and switch gears and move over to the Packers, who are coming off a thrilling fourth quarter comeback against the Saints. The top fantasy players for this team, in my opinion, are Jordan Love, Aaron Jones, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, and Luke Musgrave. First, we'll talk about Jordan Love. Let's see, Love is going against the defense, giving up the 14th most passing yards and ranked 18th for fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. The only gripe that I have with Love is his lack of yardage. He is fantasy viable just because he'll most likely give you 2 to 3 touchdowns, but you just can't happen to have a solid yardage game, which would make him a really good fantasy relevant player. And then boom, you have a fantasy winner on your hands if he's able to give you those yardage. Against the Lions defense, I just don't see 250 yards passing in him. I just give you a warning that you have to have some type of low expectations for Love this week, and I would only start him if you really have no other solid option. I believe Love's floor is high, but his ceiling is capped this week against the Lions. Now let's talk about Aaron Jones. Jones is expected to be back in action this week, in my opinion, at least as of the recording of this. No news has come out whether he will be back in action, but I do expect him to be back in action this week, and he's going against a defense that's going to be giving up the 5th fewest rushing yards and ranked 22nd for fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. These Lions aren't what you're used to seeing. They're actually a good team this year. Limit your expectations on what you're going to receive from Jones this week if he does play. I see a timeshare between Jones and A.J. Dillon to the point to where neither running back will be fantasy viable. There's a large chance that you're starting Aaron Jones even with this tough situation he's in this week just because you probably don't have anything better. You can get Jones in your lineup, but don't expect fireworks, and just a caveat, if Jones is out, the same would go for A.J. Dillon. Don't expect fireworks. Next, we have Christian Watson. There is a chance that Watson does suit up this week, which means he would be going up against the defense ranked 12th for fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. As of the recording of this video, though, however, Watson has not been ruled in or ruled out, but we all know the Packers have been playing these hamstring injuries very carefully thus far this season. He's not rushing anything, so I wouldn't be surprised if they did end up sitting Watson with that extended time before they play again. But if he's ruled in, I just believe you have to start this guy. Someone who has tremendous speed and the ability to get open. He has questionable hands, but you can see that Love is still searching for that true number 1 guy, and Watson can be just what the doctor ordered for Love. If he plays, get him in your lineups. Next, we're talking about Jaden Reed. Now, I'm really liking what I've seen from Reed thus far, and once Watson comes back, I believe that he will be that number 2 guy in Green Bay, just passing up Romeo Doubs. His route running and ability to make difficult catches has really caught my eye. Look for Reed to go ahead and continue to grow and learn. By the end of the season, I think you may be looking at a future star in the league. Last but not least, for the fantasy players I'm watching this week on Thursday Night Football is just Luke Musgrave. Musgrave is going up against a defense ranked 30th for fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. Musgrave was missed on a massive play which would have blown the top off of his stats for the day if he wasn't overthrown against the Saints. Musgrave seems to be a big part of the target share for Jordan Love, and going against a defense who seems to not stop the tight end position, it just seems like a great matchup for Musgrave. If you have him, he needs to be started in all leagues this week. Just like there's players that I would target for fantasy in this game, there's also some sleepers that could provide some pretty good fantasy value if you're in a pinch for your flex spot. For the Lions, I can see Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond as fantasy viable. The problem with that is that you don't know which one will have relevance. Odds are it's not Reynolds and Raymond, it'll be Reynolds or Raymond. If it was up to me, I wouldn't start either one of these guys, but there is a chance for one of them to have some type of flex appeal if you have them. If you don't have a better option, just throw one in your lineup. You can do a lot worse than this. Just don't expect much. For the Packers, I could see Romeo Doubs having a chance to becoming a good asset if Christian Watson ends up not playing. If Watson ends up playing, I wouldn't bother really playing Romeo Doubs. Love cannot carry 3 receivers or receiving options for fantasy just yet in his young career. You have to pick and choose the Packers offense, and I'm going to pick Watson, Reed, and Musgrave. At the end of the day, anyone could be a fantasy asset, but it is ultimately up to you on who you place into your lineups. As always, I appreciate you guys watching the videos as we're putting out videos every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Can't wait to see you guys on that next video. Will be tomorrow for the value players that you want to put in your lineup, those targets. So can't wait to see you guys on that video. We'll see you guys next time.